Hi. So my biggest takeaway from the counselor that I interviewed was confronting the discomfort from head on, specifically with your cultural background and like naming those things during your intake process very early on with your client. We both shared the same concerns of working with cis white men. And I also just want to add that for me, I know that religion is a huge trigger for me and working with religious clients, but knowing that I can't prevent those populations from wanting to see me as a therapist. And so what I got from our conversation is to name that, very early, name, my cultural background, name that I am, queer, non-binary, spiritual, but not religious, and using that as a conversation very early on, and also honoring that, like, sometimes, and we talked about this with regards to the population of working with poly and non-monogamous, which I want to get to, but sometimes sessions are going to get intense. You're going to have clients that get defensive. My therapist is working in EFT and Gottman, and a lot of what those practices and interventions include with those specific therapies is people having to do hard work with confronting emotions, and that's not easy for every clientele. And so there are going to be moments where they are going to get defensive, and you have to have things in your toolbox as a therapist that when you leave your clients and leave your office for the day, how are you self-soothing? How are you taking care of yourself and grounding yourself so that you can also continue to show up for your clients? And honoring your boundaries, honoring your humanness as well. Huge takeaways for me. I know that throughout this process and throughout my own, even in therapy, I'm trying to not get so triggered. I think this was also discussed in one of my peers' presentations when they were discussing their being atheist and still having to work with religious clients. And I think myself, even though I don't fall in that bracket, being someone that's very spiritual and not religious, how do I ground myself when working with that population? The other thing, if you ever catch me looking up professor, it's just me looking at my notes. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is the challenge of working with, specifically this counselor was like saying the two biggest challenges for her are working with clients on the themes of infidelity and navigating that issue with couples, and working with open relationships. And the biggest thing that she said with working with that population of non-monogamous and open relationships is that of course, you're balancing the aspect of multiple people and multiple, voices, and still having to play the neutral that you would just do with any other couple. But also the biggest thing was the over communicating and how that is going to offer the couples to not assume and build trust. And so sometimes you may have to over communicate, not only modeling that for them with your, as a therapist, but also teaching them how to do that amongst each other. That was huge for me. And also remembering the focusing on the relationship in the room. That was the biggest thing, focusing on the relationship in the room, because you're dealing with so many voices and chefs in the kitchen with regards to open relationships, but focusing on what is going on in the client space, meaning the two people in front of you, is going to be the thing that grounds you, and not trying to figure out all of the pieces. That's for the couple to figure out, but what you're doing as a therapist is focusing on the problem that this group of people is bringing into the therapy room for the day. I think the last thing that I want to discuss that came up was making sure that you are identifying this is the biggest thing. Acknowledge the rupture, but don't look at it as a defeat. I don't know if I discussed this already, but that is huge. I think that, like, Sometimes you're going to get clients and you said, at the end of that session, they're going to set a goal of walking, at least once a week and setting time for each other. And they may not do that goal for that day. But don't acknowledge, don't look at it as a defeat with regards to your practice, especially us being, first year therapists. There's going to be a lot of ruptures, but don't look at it as a defeat. Especially it's going to be a long process working with couples, especially if they've never done this work and they're going into couples therapy for the first time, and families as well. My therapist was an individuals and couples counselor, but you can use that perspective for families as well. That is my presentation. Thank you so much for listening, Professor. Have a great rest of your day.